Beneath a sky the color of ripe peaches, waves rolled across the surface of the sea, like soft whispers brushing against the shore. Gulls circled overhead, crying out to the wind, while silver fish danced below, flickering like stars trapped under glass. But deep below the gentle waves, where coral grew in colors that didn't even have names, and seaweed swayed, like slow music, something very unusual stirred. It was not a whale's song or a dolphin's leap that made the water tremble that morning. No, it was the sharp splash of someone swimming far too fast, far too angrily. Bubbles burst upward in furious clouds as a young mermaid darted through a forest of kelp, her long, glimmering tail flicking with frustration. Her name was Nerida, and while the sea was her home, she wanted nothing more than to leave it behind forever. The salt stung her eyes, the sand itched her scales. The wetness, the floating, the silence, all of it made her feel wrong, like a bird with heavy stones tied to its wings. While other mermaids laughed and played in the currents, Nerida stayed at the very edge of the reef, where the ocean met the open air. Today was worse than ever. A current had spun her in circles, a jellyfish had brushed her elbow with its squishy sting, and when she had tried to rest on a soft rock, a crab pinched her fin. So, she swam straight up, up toward the surface, where the water turned to sky, where air shimmered like freedom. Above the waves, she pulled herself halfway out, arms resting on a smooth stone warmed by sunlight. Her tail remained in the sea, but her heart longed for something beyond it. She didn't know what yet, only that it was dry. Nerida lingered on the sunlit rock, her arms stretched across the warm stone as the breeze kissed her face. The salty air carried the scent of faraway lands, places she could only dream of. She stared at the coastline in the distance, where cliffs rose like ancient giants and trees waved their branches in the wind like greeting hands. That, she thought, was where she belonged. Not here in this soggy, swishing world, where even thoughts felt like they floated away before they could settle. Back below, her absence had not gone unnoticed. From the coral palace carved into the side of a sea mountain, her sister Mira swam out with worried eyes. Mira was everything a seafolk princess was supposed to be: graceful, wise, and endlessly fond of water. She danced with dolphins, sang with seahorses, and even spoke the language of the turtles. But her heart was knotted with concern for her little sister, the mermaid who hated water. Mira followed the familiar trail of tiny bubbles that Nerida always left behind when she swam fast. It led, as usual, to the surface rock. There she was, leaning against the stone like a seabird with no wings. Mira didn't swim closer, not yet. Instead, she watched in silence, letting the water cradle her gently. Nerida didn't notice. Her gaze was fixed on a strange shape, bobbing near the distant shoreline. A small boat, not a big sailing ship with white wings of cloth, but a tiny one, barely bigger than a whale's back. Inside sat a figure, a boy, perhaps a little older than her, paddling with a wooden oar. She leaned forward. The boat wobbled as it neared a cluster of sharp rocks sticking out like the teeth of a sea dragon. One wrong move, and the little boat would shatter. Mira had noticed it too. She called out underwater, her voice like a bubble song trying to reach her sister. But Nerida didn't turn. Her heart had already leaped ahead toward the boy, the boat, and the rocks. Without thinking, she dove. The sea rushed back around her, cold and clingy. It was like swimming through soup made of fog and silence. But she ignored it. She shot through the water like an arrow, faster than she'd ever swum before. The boy's boat was drifting closer to the rocks. He didn't seem to see them. Perhaps he didn't understand the danger. Perhaps he was too busy looking up at the seagulls. She surfaced just beside the rocks, gasping. The boy noticed her, and his eyes grew wide with wonder. But there was no time to be amazed. Nerida slapped her tail hard against the water, sending a wave toward the boat, nudging it away from the danger. Another flick, then another. The boat slowly turned, drifting back toward safer waters. The boy, still staring in disbelief, dropped his oar. It floated near Nerida, and she grabbed it, pushing it back toward him. He caught it, held it tight, then dipped his head in a small, silent bow. And just like that, Nerida turned and vanished beneath the surface. Mira was waiting for her near the reef. She had seen everything. Still, Nerida didn't speak. She just swam past her sister, down toward her favorite cave, hidden behind a curtain of seaweed. There, among the mossy rocks and tiny glowing fish, She finally let herself feel it. Her chest thumped. Her skin tingled. And for the first time in her life, she had forgotten for just a moment that she hated the water. But the feeling didn't last. The next morning, she woke with a shiver. The wetness had crept into her dreams, into her bones. She tried to swim, but every stroke felt sticky. She wanted the sky again, the sun, the dry rock. So she returned. Day after day, she drifted to the surface, always landing on the same warm stone, and always, around the same time, the boy in the boat would appear. He never spoke, never paddled close. He just sat, dipping a hand in the sea now and then, or watching the clouds float above. But sometimes, he would toss something into the waves. A flower, a painted shell, or once, a little paper boat that Nerida caught and kept in a driftwood box. She began to wait for him. She even began to smile. But below in the sea palace, a council of elders gathered. They whispered of Nerida's strange behavior. A mermaid who disliked the sea was a danger, they said. What if she led others astray? What if she brought the surface people closer? They remembered the old stories of fishermen's nets and poisoned harpoons, of storms called down by angry sky spirits. Mira defended her sister. She spoke of the kindness Nerida had shown, of the boat she had saved, of the heart that beat bravely, even if it beat in the wrong place. But the council was unmoved. The sea must remain untouched by the land. If Nerida would not embrace her world, they said, then perhaps she should be given a choice. That night, as the moon painted silver ripples across the sea, Mira found Nerida alone, floating just below the surface, her eyes fixed on the stars. Mira told her everything. The council, the warnings, the choice. Stay below, embrace the sea, or leave it forever. Nerida froze. Leave the sea. The thought thrilled her, but also hurt. It would mean no more Mira, no more glowing fish, no more shells shaped like hearts. It would mean losing the only world she'd ever known. But to stay in water that made her feel wrong, that, too, was a kind of sadness. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she swam through every part of the reef. She touched the coral walls where she and Mira had played as hatchlings. She whispered goodbye to the dolphins who always greeted her with twirls. She let a sea turtle nuzzle her nose. And when dawn came, she rose to the surface one final time. The boy was already there. But today, something was different. His boat was packed with things, bags, bundles, a rolled-up map. His face looked unsure, as if he were preparing for a journey and didn't know the way. Nerida watched him, her heart folding in strange shapes. Then, with a deep breath, she swam to the rock, pulled herself up, and sat, not just with her arms, but fully out of the water, her tail gleaming behind her like a ribbon of moonlight. The boy saw her. Slowly, he lifted something from the boat, a rope ladder. He lowered it into the water, then stepped back. A test. An invitation. She looked down at her tail, then up at the sky. Her heart pounded with fear and longing. But before she could move, the water around her began to shimmer. It sparkled, spun, and then something incredible happened. Her tail began to change. Scales softened into skin. Fins folded into feet. She gasped as legs formed, strong and strange and new beneath her. The transformation was painless, but powerful. The sea had heard her choice, and it had answered. Mira, far below, felt the ripple in the water. A gift had been given. A farewell had begun. Above, Nerida stood shakily on the rock. The boy offered a hand. She took it, and together, they stepped into the boat, setting off toward the cliffs where trees waved and birds sang. The sea watched them go, not with anger, but with sorrow and pride. For every tide must release what it cannot hold, and every heart must find where it truly belongs. The cliffs loomed larger with every stroke of the oar. Wind tugged at the boy's hair and scattered the scent of pine and flowers across the waves. Nerida sat in the boat, wrapped in a woven blanket he had handed her. Her legs, still unfamiliar and trembling, rested stiffly on the floorboards. The rhythm of the boat on the waves felt like the lull of a song she didn't know yet, soft and strange. She should have felt joy. She had made her choice. She had left the sea behind. But deep inside her, something flickered, a tightness in her chest, a silence that wasn't the good kind. The cliffs, now tall and close, cast long shadows across the water. As they rounded a bend, a village came into view, small cottages with thatched roofs, gardens blooming in bursts of red and yellow, smoke curling from chimneys like sleepy sighs. Children chased goats, and an old woman sat spinning thread under a tree. The boy smiled, turned the boat toward the dock, and began to paddle faster. But Narita's eyes stayed on the waves. She couldn't hear the dolphins anymore, or the soft clicking of the crabs. The sea was still, too still. It was quiet in the wrong way. Suddenly, her heart jolted. The water behind them was rising, slowly, silently, like something enormous shifting beneath it. The boy noticed it too. He turned in alarm. His oar stopped mid-stroke. From the depths, a great shadow spiraled upward. A whirlpool. The waves around them began to pull inward, circling with growing speed. The boat rocked violently. Nerida gripped the sides, her breath catching in her throat. This wasn't just a storm. This was magic. Old magic. Sea magic. A judgment. The whirlpool widened, tugging the boat back toward the open sea. The village faded behind them. The sky darkened. Nerida's blanket flew off into the wind. The boy reached for the oars again, fighting to steer the boat away, but it was no use. The current was stronger than anything he'd known. Water surged over the edges. The wood groaned. One of the oars cracked in half. Nerida knew what this was. The sea had given her legs, but it had not let her go. She had not been ready. She had not said goodbye with her whole heart. Now, it wanted her back. The whirlpool spun faster. A massive wave rose behind them, cresting like a wall of glass. The boy's eyes met hers, wide, terrified. He would drown. Because of her, Nerida's chest squeezed with guilt. She had thought the sea was only cruel to her, but now it was punishing someone who had only shown kindness. And she couldn't let that happen. A roar filled the air, like the growl of some ancient sea beast. Spray lashed against their faces. The wave began to fall. And then, Nerida stood. Her legs trembled, unsure and slippery, but she found her balance. She turned toward the sea, arms outstretched, feet planted firmly in the rocking boat. And with all the voice she had, she cried out not in words, but in feeling. She poured her heart into the wind, her fear, her longing, her sorrow, her love. The sea didn't want her. She had believed that her whole life, but she had been wrong. It had always wanted her to understand it, to face it, to listen, not escape. So she stood in the storm, arms raised, eyes full of tears. And she did the one thing she had never done before. She forgave it. She forgave the sting of salt, the endless wet, the floating, the strange silence. She forgave the jellyfish and the sand that got stuck in her fins. She forgave the cold, because without those things, she would not be who she was. The sea did not love softly, but it had always loved her. And now she loved it back. The moment stretched like a breath held by the world. Then, as if the sea had been listening all along, the whirlpool slowed. The water softened. The sky opened. The boat stopped spinning. The wave collapsed into foam, and the wind scattered like birds taking flight. Everything stilled. For a long time, Nerida did not move. Then she sat down, legs aching, hands shaking. The boy touched her shoulder gently. His eyes, wide with awe, held no questions, only gratitude. They drifted, quietly, back toward shore. When the boat touched the dock, people came running, villagers pulling them in, offering towels, bread, and warm tea. The boy's mother wrapped him in her arms, sobbing into his hair. A child handed Nerida a flower, but Nerida's heart was far away. She stood, slowly, on her strange new legs, walked to the edge of the dock, and looked out at the sea. It shimmered in the sunlight, calm once more. Waves lapped against the wood like soft apologies. Mira's voice echoed in her memory, a voice full of love and longing. Nerida closed her eyes, and for the first time, she truly heard the sea. Not as a cage, not as an enemy, but as a part of her. Still, she did not dive back in. Not yet. Because now she understood something deeper than scales or skin. Belonging was not a place. It was peace inside your heart. and hers at last had begun to bloom. The days that followed moved gently, like leaves drifting down a quiet stream. Nerida stayed in the village by the cliffs, resting in a tiny cottage nestled beneath a willow tree. Her legs grew stronger with every step, though she often stumbled in the garden or leaned too hard against doors that didn't sway like seaweed. The villagers were kind. The children brought her pebbles and flowers, and the baker always set aside a roll of honey bread just for her. But it was the boy whose name was Leo who stayed closest. He showed her how to walk along forest paths without tripping, how to sit still and listen to the chirping of crickets, how to dance under the stars without needing a current to carry you. But even in the warmth of her new life, Nerida felt the sea tug at her heart like a memory that wouldn't sleep. Each morning, she rose early and climbed the winding path to the cliff's edge. There, she would sit with her feet dangling over the rocks and stare out at the endless blue. Sometimes, the waves sparkled in greeting. Sometimes, dolphins leapt in the distance. And sometimes, though only for a moment, Nerida thought she saw a flicker of silver hair beneath the waves. Mira, watching, waiting. And so the days became weeks. And the weeks slid quietly toward the season's end. The trees began to turn golden, and the wind no longer smelled only of salt, but also of apples and smoke. Still, Nerida waited. Not for her tail to return. Not for the sea to call her back. She waited for the answer to a question she didn't know how to ask. Then, one evening, as the sun melted into the horizon like spilled fire, she heard something. Not with her ears, but in her chest. A soundless song, a pulse, a feeling older than language. The sea was speaking again. She ran, barefoot, down the rocky path to the beach. The waves were calm, the sky glowing orange and violet. But something was different. A figure stood at the water's edge. Tall, graceful, familiar. Mira. Her sister's eyes sparkled like pearls, and her tail shimmered like moonlight caught in glass. She was half in, half out of the water, as if the sea itself had given her permission to visit. Nerida froze. Her heart galloped. She took a step forward, then another, until she was standing in the surf. The water licked her ankles, and for once, she didn't flinch. Mira didn't speak. She simply held out her hands, and Nerida walked into them. They embraced sea and sky meeting in the arms of two sisters. Salt tears mixed with seawater, and for a long time, neither moved. Time folded in on itself, and the waves hushed their rhythm in reverence. When they pulled apart, Mira smiled not with sadness, but with pride. She had seen the whirlpool. She had felt the change in the tides. She knew what Nerida had done, and though no words passed between them, the message was clear. Nerida had grown. She had not run from the sea. She had made peace with it. Now, she could truly choose. Mira reached into a pouch at her side and pulled out a shell smooth and pale, shaped like a spiral. She placed it in Nerida's palm. And then, without a word, she sank back into the waves and was gone. Nerida stood in the shallows, holding the shell to her heart. That night, she placed it on her windowsill, where the moonlight could touch it. From that day on, Nerida walked with greater strength. Her steps were steadier. Her laughter rang louder. She helped the villagers gather herbs, taught the children to listen to the wind, and carved shapes into driftwood that reminded her of home. But now, home was something bigger. One crisp morning, as the sky blushed with dawn, Nerida awoke with a feeling in her bones light and urgent. She rose, dressed quickly, and climbed to the cliff. The sea below sparkled as if it knew she was coming. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the spiral shell. It pulsed warmly in her hand. Then she raised it to her lips and exhaled. The sound that followed was not a note or a cry, but something deeper, a call of belonging. The waves stirred, and far out in the distance, something answered. Nerida smiled. She did not need to choose one world over the other. She had both. The sea had tested her, yes, but it had also given her a gift, not legs or freedom, but understanding. Now, when she stepped into the waves, they welcomed her. Her tail no longer came back, but the water did not reject her. It wrapped around her like a friend. She could swim short distances, float for hours, dive beneath the surface without fear. And when she returned to land, the sky waited with open arms. Years passed. Nerida became a bridge between two worlds, the girl from the sea who lived on the land. Children came to her with questions about starfish and tides. Sailors asked her for advice before voyages. Even the wind seemed to pause near her window, as if hoping to hear her thoughts. Leo stayed by her side. He built boats that could ride both calm and storm. Together, they created maps of hidden coves and moonlit beaches. And sometimes, when the night was quiet, they would sail out under the stars just to listen. To the sea. To the sky. To each other. And every time Nerida sat at the edge of the water, feeling the pulse of the world beneath her feet, she remembered what it had once felt like to hate the sea. And how that hatred had been nothing more than a seed waiting to be understood. Because sometimes, the things we push away are the things we must learn to love. And sometimes, the home we seek is the one we carry inside us all along. So the girl who once longed for dry land became the woman who loved both shore and sea. And the world in all its wild, wondrous magic opened its arms to her at last.